Welcome to College Admissions Toolbox, giving you the edge you need to get into the colleges of your dreams, with your host, Steve Schwartz. That's me. Today, we're talking with Sunil Damle. Welcome to College Admissions Toolbox. Sunil, I'm so excited to have you on the show. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Steve. How are you doing yourself?
Awesome. Thank you. Now, Sunil, you have an extremely interesting background. You've actually worked with students in China as a college counselor in a school there, and since then you've gone on to co-found a startup in Shanghai to help international students apply to college. Tell us a little bit about your journey.
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in Colorado. Both my parents are first-generation immigrants to the United States. My dad came to the U.S. from India for a graduate program at the University of Michigan, and my mom is an immigrant from Croatia. She first came over when she was a teenager to work as an au pair in a Croatian family's house. Growing up, both my parents have a really a great or well-rounded perspective on the U.S. undergraduate college admissions process. And so, at the time, while I was applying to college, exactly have the best guidance, I guess you could say, at home. And, had it not been for my older brother who applied to me, I definitely would have been, pretty lost throughout the entire process. So with that in mind and kind of getting through the process and understanding how difficult it can be for, applicants who don't necessarily have guidance from their family or, a lot of guidance counselors in their schools. While I was in college, I went to Occidental College, a small liberal arts school in Los Angeles. I decided to sort of give back to that cause, and I worked in high schools in LAUSD, the Los Angeles Unified School District, as a mentor for first-generation students, basically the first ones in their family to apply to college. While I was also in college, I was studying Chinese, and my major was international affairs, so I was really interested in U.S.-China relations. And when I was a senior, I had an awesome opportunity to kind of merge those two interests: college admissions on the one hand, and international affairs, U.S.-China relations on the other, and returned to China to work as a counselor at a local public school in China, which sent a high volume of students to the United States. And it was through that experience of working at that school that I identified, a series of problems in the way that Chinese students were preparing for the admissions process and preparing for, attending university and college in the U.S. And so that's kind of the short story of kind of how I got to work today here in Shanghai.
What were some of the biggest problems you saw in the school you were working in as far as how the Chinese applicants were applying to these applying internationally to schools in the U.S., Canada, that sort of thing?
Yeah. There were a few big ones. The first one was that a lot of the students, I guess, didn't necessarily understand the holistic admissions process. So they were sort of misinformed about the criteria that competitive and selective universities use when evaluating applicants. And by that I mean that they were sort of, going off their SAT score and their GPA to try to determine where they were going to apply. They kind of saw it as, I kind of fit within this bracket of schools, within that are ranked, as such. And I'm only going to apply to schools in that bracket. Obviously, the biggest problem with that is that, schools are looking for fit and match. And so they're sort of missing out on the fit and match element and would apply to schools just based on their statistics and wouldn't get in because, they weren't able to convey fit and match. They weren't understanding that other half of the process besides the cold hard statistics. Another problem was where they were going to access their information. So, in the United States, there's obviously a lot of resources that students can utilize to gain information and insights into the college admissions process. But in China, because, for a variety of reasons, the biggest one is perhaps the Great Firewall, which blocks a lot of Western websites and resources here in China. And for that reason, a lot of Chinese students rely on Chinese resources, content created here in China, for sort of, their authoritative guidance on different aspects of the admissions process. And the problem with this is that a lot of these resources, aren't providing the best information and they're kind of guiding students down the wrong path. And so, I think those were the two big ones that I identified. Students also, spent way too much time investing into the test preparation process, and really just focusing, hours, in fact, at the school that I was working at, the senior threes, which would be, seniors, in the U.S. school system would leave school for 2 weeks in the fall and just miss class to study for the SAT. So in many ways, they were way too focused on just one small piece of the puzzle and not really understanding the rest of it to be successful in the process.
It sounds like an enormous problem, the lack of access to information. What do you make of this focus on the standardized testing and the hard numbers emphasis in China as opposed to the lack of understanding of fit and match?
Yeah, well, I think where you have to start, the focus on testing has been born out of. So here in China, the way that students get into colleges, local colleges here in China, is through one test. Their future is dictated by one test called the Gaokao, and they basically study for that for their entire life. And that one score that they receive is going to determine whether they go to Tsinghua or Beida, the country's two top universities, or a lower tier university. And to a large extent, whether or not they go to one of those top schools or they go to a lower school is going to kind of dictate their success in the future, because most of the big companies, multinational corporations, etc., really only recruit out of the top, 5 to 10 schools here in China. And so, as a result of how the system works here in China, students sort of have this, I guess it's just kind of embedded within the education system that they have to sort of prepare for a test, and that it's all about a test, and it's all about that result on a test. And so, as a result of that, and as a result, I guess, of just a lack of education, they have this kind of focus on us, the exam. And so I think a big part of it is historical, and that the way the education system is set up here in China. There's cultural context, and again, just a lack of understanding and a lack of information being disseminated about the fact that that's not the only and most important part of the process.
Wow, that's really something. So it kind of seems like the domestic emphasis on the standardized testing, the focus on the numbers, is impacting how these applicants see the admission process when they're looking to go overseas to maybe North America or somewhere else, where fit and match, those soft extracurricular factors, the essays, are actually given a great deal of weight as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And part of that is because a lot of times students who decide to study in the U.S., Canada, the United Kingdom, wherever it might be, they don't really make that decision until high school. And so, in elementary school and middle school, where education systems and the curriculum are still set up to prepare students for the Gaokao, that's being internalized all throughout elementary school, middle school, to focus on the exam. And so, yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, it's just something that's deeply embedded into the educational culture, and that, it requires a lot of education and a lot of, increasing awareness of the students, to the holistic application process to change it.
Sure. Now, nowadays, with Mentorverse, you're working privately with a lot of Chinese applicants. What are the steps that you would say to one of our listeners out there who's from China or another country where standardized tests are given such a great emphasis? What are the steps you would recommend to them in order to learn about some of those fit and match factors, and what would you recommend they do?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there's a lot of different things that one can do as a student in China. This could apply to really any international student where there is some barrier to access of information. I think the first thing would be to talk to people if they're accessible. In some cases, they might not always be accessible, and that's kind of part of what we're trying to do with Mentorverse, is to a certain degree democratize access to human resources, but to talk to people that have experience going through this process. And so a lot of Chinese students, and so for Chinese students, this would be to reach out to other students from China, which are accessible through various social networks. The big social network here in China is WeChat. It's a messaging chat, and through it, there's these large networks and large group chats of students who have kind of gone through the process and study abroad. And so just reach out to a student who has gone through the process before and now, is on campus in America, and in retrospect sort of understands the importance of the other 75% of the application process. With that, I think students should also make any effort possible using the internet to reach out to alumni or current students to understand and learn about, the process that they went through in order to get into those schools, and sort of what they did beyond just preparing for the SAT, to be best positioned to earn acceptance to elite colleges. And so I think accessing human resources in any way you can, is really step number one. Step number two, is there are tons of resources online. And even here in China, like I said, one of the big barriers is that most of the online resources that Chinese students have access to are sort of filtered. But I think, with a little bit of ingenuity, I think students can access Western resources that kind of explain the process a little bit more in depth. There's a pretty famous book on college admissions called Gatekeeper, in which the admissions process at Wesleyan was sort of the author was essentially a fly on the wall in the admissions process in Wesleyan, and also sort of looked at it from the perspective of I believe it was 4 or 5 applicants who were applying to Wesleyan. And sort of, I guess, reading books like that, for example, where you get a window into the decision-making process by admissions officers and the way in which other students prepared for themselves, I think can give Chinese students a little bit more insight into how schools make their decisions, and as a result, how they can best prepare in a holistic manner. And those books are easily available on e-commerce sites like Taobao and etc. So definitely available here in China. And then the other aspect of it would be for those Chinese students who have counselors to listen to their counselors, because a lot of counselors here in China are trained to provide Chinese students with obviously the best information possible, and the most up-to-date information possible about what it takes to get into school. And I guess I'll add one more thing to that, which would be when colleges do attend China, when college representatives and admissions officers do come to China, to absolutely take the opportunity to attend those sessions, to get the contact information of the admissions officers, and to email them, and kind of get a sense of and I guess directly ask them what they can be doing there, over however much time they have left in high school to apply to that college.
Well, absolutely, Sunil. You just gave us so many powerful nuggets. I hope our listeners in China and elsewhere who don't have the same access to information are really listening closely to what you said, because I love the Gatekeeper. I'm great insight into the admissions process. I'll link to it in the show notes. I love the recommendation about, talking to folks who've been through the process, really kind of learning from those who've already been there and hearing their experiences. Definitely really valuable to do that. Collect as much information as you can. Be resourceful. Connect to the websites and resources you can. Get the books you can through whatever means you can. You really got to learn. It's worth the investment of effort, no doubt.
Yeah, and do you mind if I jump in real quick and add one more thing to that?
Sure.
Yeah, there's a starting point to all of this, which is that the first thing that you need to do is you need to be proactive, and you need to empower yourself to go out and do these. Some students just simply aren't proactive; they're reactive. They wait for information to come to them. They expect other people to tell them what to do. And I think that students who are proactive, and I think you need to be proactive in order to sort of do exactly the things that I was just talking about. So students who are proactive, I think, will be rewarded. And so the very first step would be to be proactive. I think it requires a proactive student to sort of find these resources and to use them to their best advantage.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's easy to fall into the trap of thinking that, the numbers will be enough and it's hard to know where to look. But just going on a message board like, the Reddit College Admissions Forum and, posting a question and then just ask for help. And people will be glad to jump in and give you some advice. So you can go on a message board. You can also Google. You don't even have to have human interaction if you don't want to. And you can, take that first step to be proactive and look for the information that you need, especially learning about those soft factors, the fit and match, the extracurriculars, what goes into a good college essay. So definitely really powerful insight there, Sunil. I want to shift gears a little bit. What we really love to hear on College Admissions Toolbox are stories. Could you take us to the moment in time of the worst college admissions moment you've seen or experienced and tell us the story behind it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I'll start with a story from my time working as a counselor at the school, as you mentioned, at the school here in China. So I was working as a counselor at a school in Ningbo. And for the listeners who don't who haven't heard of Ningbo, I hadn't heard of it before I moved to China. Not a lot of people have, but it's about 2 hours south of Shanghai. And there's a surprising number of students from this, I guess what we consider to be a third or fourth tier city in China who want to study abroad. However, because, studying abroad is very new from this particular region of China, I mean, it's really only just, begun to explode over the past 2 or 3 years, compared to Shanghai and Beijing and some of the more developed cities. Students have been studying abroad for the past decade or so. So I think there's still obviously, a gap in information for those students, in third or fourth tier cities. So I was based in this school, and we had some students who were applying to the UC school system. Obviously, as you know, the UC application, you write 2 essays for, and the application covers all of the UC schools. And we had basically all of our students provide us with their essays before they submitted them, so we can, make a final check. For some of the students who are more motivated, we've been working on them, throughout the time prior to the application deadline. But some of the students just sort of gave us essays with a friend. And, what we found was that a few of our students, 2 of them, to be exact, had the exact same essay. And so basically what that meant, so we're reading through them and we noticed that literally 95% of the essay, it was an answer to one of the UC questions. They were identical to one another. And so what we quickly realized was that both students had employed the same agency. And here in China, agencies are companies that will write essays for students and basically fabricate their entire applications. And so, both students at the same agency, write their essays, and that agency, hoping that, students wouldn't realize it, had wrote this almost literally an identical essay for them. So I'd have to say that was probably the worst admissions moment, I experienced working there. There was another moment with an applicant who had someone write his essay for him, and whoever wrote it for him got his gender wrong. And so at the end of the essay, there was a moment where sort of referring to his future, and it read, I want to become, a strong professional lady. And this was a male applicant, right? Yeah. So obviously, I think the worst admissions, though, I mean, both of those are pretty bad in the sense that I think, there's a lot of lessons to be learned from that. They're bad in the sense that I think they demonstrate, on macro level, a really big problem in international admissions, which is students who are having essays written for them, and in fact, their entire application constructed and built for them by outside companies. I think those 2 examples, and when we show them to the students, kind of explain to them what the problems are, were awesome learning moments. So there were worse admissions moments in the sense that, obviously they're comical, but they also showed kind of one of the bad things that's going on in international admissions. But there were also learning moments. So I think, that there was obviously a silver lining to it. But I guess, that's just a little nugget of some of the things that you see working in admissions out here in China.
Oh, that's really something. Well, I gotta say, those students, are really lucky that you were there to catch those errors. I mean,
not all students are that lucky.
No, I mean, they probably didn't deserve that. They probably deserved to get caught. I know the culture over there can be a little bit different sometimes, but at the end of the day, you're supposed to write your own essay. But this isn't only a risk for students overseas in China. If you're an American student, you hire some company to write an essay for you. They might send the same essay to a dozen people. But once they've got their money, what are you going to do? Months later, you get denied. You don't know why. Hire an agency, and then they sell the same essay to 2 different applicants, both of whom are applying to the exact same college. That admissions reader might catch that. And then, similarly with the gender thing, maybe some company, farms the work overseas to someone where, native English isn't their native language, and maybe it's not going to be high quality. And if you don't read it over carefully enough, maybe you'll miss that she, he gender difference, or something as egregious as saying lady when we're talking about someone who's male. So those are definitely some risks. You got to write your own essay, no question about it.
Right, absolutely. I mean, you come across as more authentic, and really that, the college admissions process is about finding and articulating your own identity. And you can't do that if someone else is writing your essay.
Yeah, it's got to be cohesive. It's got to match the theme and the tone of all the other aspects of your application, your other essays, the way teachers and counselors describe you in letters of recommendation, the list of activities that you have, it's all gotta be a similar theme in the end. And you kind of lose that when you have someone else doing a lot of the work there. So definitely valuable insight there. Thanks so much for sharing that, Sunil. And what was your own college admissions experience like?
Yeah, so, my experience, basically the thing that I was most passionate about when I was in high school was speech and debate. And, I hadn't really focused on anything else when I was in high school. I played baseball and a few other sports. But I was really passionate about speech and debate. And so, when my admissions cycle began, when I started having to think about where I was going to apply and what I was interested in and how I was going to, package everything together and articulate it to admissions officers, it was pretty evident to me, and to the people who were providing me with guidance that, that was going to be my hook. Basically my passion for debate and my passion for argumentation and my passion for understanding the world around us and being able to talk about it. And so, I think I was very successful in selling that one aspect of myself and how that would add value to a college campus. And I think that's what ultimately made me successful in the process, because I definitely wasn't a student who had, the highest SAT score, the very highest GPA, even at my school. And I think I was still able to be successful at some very, very selective colleges, because of the way that I articulated my hook, and the way that I demonstrated to school that it would add value to their campus. In terms of, the actual, nitty gritty, I think, for me, I sort of wanted to go to a really small school. And I think I knew that, from the time that I became passionate about speech and debate, because I knew that, I had a big mouth and I just couldn't stop talking. So I knew, that I wanted to be in an environment where I'd be able to sort of contribute to classes day one, and contribute to classroom discussion. And so liberal arts colleges definitely spoke to me most in the process. And so I ultimately ended up, applying to only 4 schools, 2 of which were, liberal arts schools, Occidental College and Colorado College, which is about 10 minutes from my home, in my hometown of Colorado Springs. And, I was selected everywhere where I applied. And in retrospect, I think that, I probably could have aimed a little bit higher. I think that I didn't, give myself as much credit in terms of what I'd accomplished in high school. I thought, well, I'm not the valedictorian. I haven't done, 15 different things and excelled in 20 different things. But what I came to realize after I began to work with students is that it's not about, excelling in 15 or 20 different things. But it's about being really passionate about one thing, and really demonstrating that throughout your entire application. So I think I may have been able to apply to a few more schools and maybe had a few more options. And maybe I did limit myself, but I don't regret my decision to go where I went at all.
No, absolutely. I mean, you ended up being happy, you're successful, it all worked out in the end. But absolutely, the colleges don't just want students who got 2400s and are valedictorian. They want also people who are going to be interesting to interact with. You don't want people you'd be afraid to be stuck in an elevator with because you'd have nothing to say. You want someone with an interesting background, passion, and certainly speech and debate would definitely speak well to that. You ended up happy, you ended up successful, but absolutely, right. I think you would have made a compelling applicant at some higher ranked schools should you have wanted to go to those schools. And you don't want to undersell yourself.
Yeah, exactly. And, that would have just given me more options. And I think, probably we were talking about worst moments. Let me just transition to, a really wonderful moment I had in the process.
Sure.
To sort of leave it on that note. When I got my acceptance letter from Colorado College, the one thing that I remember, and I think I still have this somewhere in my house back in Colorado. I think definitely my mom or my dad kept it for me, but it was a handwritten note from the admissions officer, I was the dean of admissions, basically saying that it was my passion for speech and debate that really shined through in the application and really gave them a sense of what I would bring to their campus, and sort of seeing and understanding, wow, my commitment to something that I was very passionate about really did pay off. It really did shine through the application, and I wasn't hurt by the fact that I wasn't superficially participating in a bunch of different things just to pad my resume. Really, gave me hope and faith that, it is about depth and not necessarily, just counting the number of things you've done and padding your resume.
Absolutely. It goes back to this thing, you don't want to be a jack of all trades and master of none. You don't want to have a laundry list of several things that you do each one kind of okay. You want to pick, one or two or maybe three at most, a couple of things that you're really passionate about, even one, and just pursue it and become excellent at it, excel at it, become a superstar in that particular area. And that's where you're really going to shine. And, admissions officers are going to take notice. And
yeah,
no, absolutely.
Yeah, I was just going to say, so, a lot of students will ask me, don't colleges want well-rounded applicants? And I tell them, really that's not the case. They want angular applicants, applicants who really excel at one thing. They demonstrate passion to form a well-rounded class.
Absolutely. On the one hand, you don't want to be a complete nerd and, only about the academics. You also don't want to be someone who's only able to speak about one topic. But at the same time, absolutely, you do want to be someone who's angular, who's like, you're the speech and debate guy. And that's what you are, and they know that you're going to go to Occidental, and you're probably going to get involved in that community in some way. And even if not, speech and debate is a valuable skill to have in any field, so they know you're going to excel. But definitely, just to come back to what we talked about a little bit earlier, you don't want to undersell yourself. You want to, if you have a particular hook, you want to milk that in a way. You want to, refine that story in your college essay. You want to have your teachers talking about it in the letters of rec. And yeah, you don't want to apply to no safeties and no schools that are on your level, but you do want to apply to a couple of reaches as well, because who knows? Maybe you'll get lucky. Maybe they will recognize your valuable skill and want you to contribute to their campus community.
Yeah, absolutely. In retrospect, I definitely think that that's kind of the one place where I went wrong, is I didn't really apply to any reaches. I kind of stayed safe in my target zones. And so I definitely would advise and have advised, students who are applying to college to always a little big, because, there's always outliers, from the the cold hard statistics. Sometimes if you plot, all of the students who apply to a certain university on a graph, you'll tend to see that most of them who are accepted, will fall high. Take an Ivy League school, for example. They'll fall high on the GPA, the SAT spectrum, right? So they'll fall in the top right-hand corner if GPA or test scores was on the X or Y axis, etc. But you'll always see green dots of students who are accepted that sort of fall outside of that area. And there's no reason why you can't be that outlier. So I think that students shouldn't get discouraged for any one reason, and should really just apply to wherever they think they fit, even if they believe it's a reach based on, certain criteria.
Well, absolutely. The colleges are always going to reserve spots for outliers because, they've got to keep themselves high in the rankings where GPA and SAT are really big factors. But at the same time, they want a class as a whole that is well-rounded. They want those interesting stories that are going to look good for their brochures. They want those interesting stories of people who they know are going to go on to do great things in a variety of fields. So there's no reason not to try to become that outlier. You were one, Sunil. I was certainly one as well. And I think, the college is definitely reserving lots of spaces for those types of students. So definitely lots of powerful nuggets there. Thanks for sharing those, Sunil. I want to shift gears a little bit now and move on to a light bulb moment that you've seen or experienced, that, maybe an applicant that you've worked with, that aha moment that led them on the path to success. Can you share that step-by-step process with some concrete details?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess I'll tell the story about a student that I worked with this past cycle. But one of the things that I really, tend to emphasize when I work with students is to look at the histories of the colleges that they apply to, because oftentimes what you'll find is embedded within those histories is, the ethos of the college and what they look for in students. And so, a great example is a student I worked with who was applying to Cornell. And before, he was applying to Cornell, or before we started working on his Cornell supplement, and on his Cornell, the Cornell aspect of his application, he was really struggling to think of ideas for his essay, think of what he was going to write about, how he was going to articulate his fit. And then what we decided to do is we decided to kind of go through the history of Cornell. Who were the two founders of and what did they represent to the college? And actually, one of the founders is Ezra Cornell, and actually the other names, I think it was Andrew Dixon. I can't quite remember. The name is escaping me right at the moment. But the point is that we looked at sort of who the founders were of the school and what they brought to the school. So Ezra Cornell was a farmer. And obviously Cornell is really well known for, its agriculture school, and for things like that. And so after going through sort of the ethos that the founders brought, immediately identified, how he related to that, how he related to, the history of the school, bring on to kind of carry that legacy in each of their classes. And he immediately got idea to write an essay that sort of tied him to the history of the college and the founders of the college and some of the folklore of the college and some of the stories that students students on campus would tell about Cornell. And so I think educating him on the history of the school was really helpful. And another great example is UPenn and its founder Benjamin Franklin, the entrepreneurial spirit that school has. It's always turning out awesome entrepreneurs, people who have wonderful startups. And I think to know that, to know the essence of the school as it's told sort of the founding story of the school will help you in the admissions process and it might give you that light bulb moment on the supplement and how you could approach that supplement.
Wow, Sunil, so many knowledge bombs there. I can't believe it. Because even if you don't want to write your college essay in that way, so many schools are asking, why our school in particular? Why do you want to come to us? There's always room for that somewhere. And you can easily do a mini essay covering that. Show you've done your homework. Show that you want to really go to their school specifically and you're passionate about their school because, as you know, Sunil, like one of the ways that schools are ranked is based on their yield. How many students who are accepted choose to end up saying, yes, I will go to your school.
Right.
And so if you can convince them that you really want to go to their school and if they take you, you'll choose them and not one of the other handful of schools that might take you, that's going to increase your odds from the beginning. So definitely doing that research, poking around the website, super valuable.
Yeah, and you know what? Just to add to that, just a little bit. At the end of the day, the people who are making the decisions in admissions offices, they might not tell you this, but the reality of the matter is that their jobs are sort of evaluated on the admit rate and the yield rate, right? So is the admit rate going down? Are they increasing? Because that's what makes them more selective. And the way that they can increase the yield is ensure that they're bringing students who demonstrate fit and who are likely to attend the school. And so that's why there's sort of a natural incentive for them to admit students they feel like are going to attend the college.
Absolutely. You've got to look at, the unique attributes of that school, the school's unique characteristics, and be prepared to talk about those a bit in one of your essays if you can fit it in. And certainly, if you're having an interview, you've got to do that research as well. You don't want to come across as clueless about a major aspect of the university or college you're applying to, and then look like you haven't done your homework and then you don't really care about their school in particular. It's going to come across. You get caught.
Absolutely. And just another thing to add to that, in my discussions with some admissions officers, oftentimes they feel like the supplement essays, so your answers to supplement questions, are actually more important than your personal statement. And so as a result of that, students, I think a lot of times will like leave their supplement till the last few days before they're turning in their applications, and they've spent months working on their personal statement. But I think in many ways, students need to focus more on their supplement. And I think one of the ways to find an aha moment, on the supplement is to look into the history of the school and to look into the founding principles.
No, absolutely. It's a great tip. The supplemental essays, they're the questions that the schools care about so much that they bothered to make a separate essay about it instead of just relying on the Common App. Those are the questions that are often going to reflect the themes and values of the school. And I know it's a lot of extra work to write all these supplemental essays when you're already working on the Common App essay and a million other things. But keep in mind that you still might be able to reuse some of what you write for one supplemental essay for one college in another college's supplemental essay. I know I did that. There's ways to make it work and still answer their questions.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Definitely. So definitely some good tips there. Thanks, Sunil. I want to shift gears now, moving to the lightning round, where I'm going to ask you some rapid fire questions. You give me some rapid fire responses. Are you ready?
Perfect. I'm ready to go.
Awesome. All right. Sunil, what's your number one piece of advice for the college admissions process?
Be proactive, not reactive. Reach out to as many people as possible. Reach out to professors. Reach out to admissions officers. Don't leave any stone unturned. Let me put it that way.
Absolutely. Be proactive. Share one habit that you believe contributes to college admissions success.
One habit. Reading, I think. Try to read a new book that relates to something you're interested in. Once a month. I mean, maybe not that because a lot of students are really busy with school reading, but just try to read outside of what you're assigned for in school, because the knowledge that you gain from those books is going to, is going to help you in the application process and in showing your passions and them coming across in the application.
Absolutely. It also makes you a better writer.
Yep. Absolutely. That's good. That's a great point as well.
What's one online college admissions resource that you absolutely love?
Yeah, so right now, I mean, there's some awesome, obviously there's been this gigantic wave of innovation in technology in Silicon Valley, and I think there's been a lot of really cool startups that are now emerging in the admissions space that are using technology to help students find where they fit in and to help them raise scholarship money. And so I'll mention a few. One is raise.me, and raise.me, so that's raise, is, basically allows you to earn scholarship money for your achievements throughout high school. And so just a quick example of that would be, you make the varsity basketball team, someone gives you $1,000 that you can put towards your college education. Really, really neat model. There's another one called Admittedly, which uses kind of quizzes and games. So a really, engaging way to help you find what schools fit you. So I guess resources that sort of utilize technology to help students in a variety of different ways are resources that I'm absolutely in love with right now.
Those both sound great, and we're definitely going to link to them in the show notes.
Yeah,
thanks for sharing those. What's one book that you believe no college applicant should be without?
Yeah, so I mentioned Gatekeeper earlier in our conversation. I'll take a little bit of a unique approach to this answer, since I already mentioned one book that's directly related to admissions. I'll go ahead and say the one book that no college application should be without is based on what that applicant is passionate about. So whatever is, the foremost piece of reading in the field that they love. So for me, when I was in high school, obviously loving speech and debate and politics, I read The World is Flat by Thomas Friedman. And it was the information and insights I gained from that book that actually really helped me a ton in the application process. Because obviously, like you said, it makes you a better writer, but it also helps you understand your passion more, and you're able to articulate that. And I think that'll come through in the application. So since I already mentioned one book directly related to admissions, we'll go, with something that most people wouldn't think would be a resource, for admissions, but it really is, which is just books in any other subject.
Absolutely. Makes you a more interesting person, gives you something to talk about during the college interview.
Yeah.
Maybe something to work into your personal statement in your college essay in some way as well. So, reading is always a good thing. Absolutely. Now, what are you working on these days, Sunil? What's keeping you busy? What are you looking forward to?
Yeah. So, working on a lot of things right now. We have, as you mentioned in the introduction, I'm currently co-founding a startup called Mentorverse.us. And we'll link that, I guess, in the notes as well. And we have sort of a companion product to that, platform to that, called Q and Admit, qadmit.com. And both of these are online platforms, mostly designed for international students, but really any student around the world can use them. that are designed to democratize access to admissions resources for students and break down barriers. And so with Mentorverse, what we're doing is we are basically aggregating the best counselors, independent counselors all throughout the world, and putting them on one platform for students to discover, so that any student anywhere in the world, whether it's in Xi'an, China, which is a city, about 2 hours west of here in Shanghai, or, Accra, Ghana, or somewhere in Southeast Asia, they can get online and discover a counselor who matches their educational goals and can then work with them through the process, and hopefully inspire them to achieve, fulfill their potential. And then with Q and Admit, we're a Quora style, question and answer board where, verified admissions experts can answer student questions. And so students can, log in, register, ask questions, and then those questions are answered by admissions experts. And then, other students or other members of the community can go in and upvote, those questions. And, if your question is upvoted, you can earn points, and then you can earn badges. And so we're trying to really focus on creating a community, and creating an environment in where students and experts can share questions and insights. And so that's what we're working on right now. There are a ton of resources in the US, and we kind of see, the resources that are made available and marketed to international students to be less in number. So that's why our focus is on international students, but we're definitely, because it's a technology platform, it's accessible to everyone. And so, that's what I'm really excited about. And, I'm just excited about, the ability to connect, people, places, and ideas in the admission space.
No, absolutely. It sounds like you're working on some really exciting stuff. You'll have to keep us posted on it, and we'll definitely be linking in the show notes as well. Where can folks find you online, Sunil?
Yeah, so, they can find me on either the mentorverse.us or QAdmit website. That you can also, anybody can freely email me at ssdamle1@gmail.com. So that's ssdamle1@gmail.com. I'm more than happy to answer anybody's questions about the work I'm doing, and obviously, hopefully, share some of the insights I have on the college admissions process.
No, absolutely. That's so kind of you, Sunil. Definitely, listeners, definitely reach out to Sunil. Bug him with lots of questions. He's awesome. He's been so much insight. Thanks so much, Sunil, for joining us. We'll have to have you back sometime soon. Be well.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for having me, Steve.
Totally. It was a pleasure. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to College Admissions Toolbox. Head over to www.collegeadmissionstoolbox.com to get more free tools and resources that will help you get into the colleges of your dreams.